Hi everybody, welcome to Q&A part 2. It turns out you asked a lot of questions and I answered them all at great length. So we've broken them up into 2 Q&A videos to avoid you sitting there for half an hour. I don't know, it's a YouTube thing. Anyway, I hope you like this second half of my delightful chatty Cathy Q&A. Before publishing a novel, are you nervous people won't like it? And the answer to that question is yes-ish. When Night School came out, I didn't know enough to be nervous, which is daft, but I didn't come up through the book writing community or the book blogging community. All I knew about fiction, in all honesty, was reading books on my own. I'm a separatist, and I still am a separatist. I tend not to join any groups. I don't join any cliques. They don't invite me, and I don't want in. I definitely take the Groucho Marx approach. I don't want to be a member of any club that would accept me. So I've always been that person in the corner with a book going, how does this work? I'll read a book about it. Like, if there's things that I could find out by asking somebody, I will still look it up. I have encyclopedias. Like, I'm that 20th century and bookish, and I like turning pages. So I didn't know anything about publishing when I got into publishing. So if you are out there thinking, I can't possibly write a book because I don't know anything about publishing, well, here I am to prove that you can absolutely do that. I didn't know a thing. I didn't know how you get agents. I didn't know how agents work with publishing houses. I didn't know how much I'd get in royalties. I didn't know how advances worked. I hoped it was $1 million. It was not $1 million. That is the one thing I regret, that was not true. I didn't know to be nervous. I didn't think about negative reviews. I just thought, I've done this book and then it will be in people's hands and maybe they will buy it. I worried people wouldn't buy it. More than anything, I worried about indifference, about people just not noticing and just not caring. That's worse. Like, the opposite of like success to me is not failure. It's just not being noticed in this weird way. Like the book just not getting into the right hands. That was what I worried about. And then over time, what came to pass is I did get negative reviews. In fact, one of the first big reviews of Night School was negative on Goodreads. And I read it and I thought, you know, fair enough. You didn't like it. That's cool. Like, I could see what she didn't get about it. And I thought about all the books I didn't like that other people liked, and I could put that in perspective. And so that meant when the second book came out, and I would have been nervous, I would just had crossed over from not knowing I should be nervous to not caring very quickly. So I don't, but it would make me very sad if I wrote something everybody hated, like if I found out and knew, and that's always a possibility. What I'm more afraid of when I'm writing is that I won't like it, if that makes sense. If I don't love a book, I feel like I don't infuse that book with passion, and a book that isn't infused with passion, I think we've all read them, like we've all come across them, and you think this is fine, but it's not, it's got no oomph. And all my books, if I don't love my characters, by the time I finish that book, then I would think nobody's gonna like this book because I don't really like this book. But I've been very lucky in that every book I have completed, even if I didn't like it at the beginning or I wasn't sure at the beginning, by the time I got to the end, I'd found my story and I'd found my character and my voice, and I could go back to the beginning and just infuse it with that enthusiasm and passion and love, and then feel confident. But I still worry that I'll start a book, I'll get a contract for a book, I'll be forced to write a book that I don't like. And if that ever happens, I feel like I should warn you. Be like, this one, don't buy it, don't. But it hasn't happened yet so far. And the one I'm working on now, which is completely different from anything else I've ever written, love it. So far so good. Let's just hang in there. So yeah, I don't worry too much, but for all the wrong reasons, because I'm an introvert and a bookish weirdo and I should worry. So don't worry if you worry. It's fine to, it's right to worry. I'm weird for not worrying, but I don't worry. How did you move from journalism to fiction? Oh, that one is really, it's so odd. My life is so odd, you guys, because everything I've done just makes no sense. So journalism was my first job. As many of you know, I was a newspaper reporter. I started as a crime reporter in America, and I worked for several different newspapers, the Savannah Morning News, the Dallas Morning News, and I worked for Reuters, and I was like proper, like I was good. I was a good journalist. I loved it. And I got fired a lot, don't get me wrong. Not all my editors appreciated my greatness, or when I say greatness, I mean lateness and bad attitude. And I did have a bad attitude. I was like a complete journalism purist. Like, I got fired from one paper, which I will not name because I don't want to upset anybody, in Texas. You know who you are. And actually got fired by 2 newspapers in Texas now that I think about it. Screw you, Texas. My home state. So I got fired from this newspaper in deep South Texas, small one. It was a terrible paper. God, it was awful. I didn't know what to look for. I had some friends who worked there. And I'd been working in Savannah and I loved it. And I went to this awful paper. And as soon as I got there, I knew it was awful. But I was there, right? And I had no money, which is why I'd taken the job, because they would pay more than Savannah, where I had been deeply loved and could have stayed forever. Pretty happily, but there was no money there. And also I was a little homesick. So I went back to this paper, horrible. Boss was awful. He just shouldn't have run a newspaper. He would do whatever the advertisers told him. I mean, he would write a story that was completely false and it made an advertiser happy. I didn't even know what to do with that. And so we would have these huge fights. And then one day, because I stand up, y'all, and stories I wrote would get canceled. I can't remember what story it was, but it was canceled because the used car dealerships in town did not like it. And I still can't remember what that story was. What was I writing about? I was a crime reporter. Maybe they were stealing. He killed the story because they didn't like it. And I called him a eunuch, and he had to look it up, I think, because it took him 3 days to fire me. And then he fired me for insubordination, which is fair enough. I was incredibly insubordinate and so eager to get fired that I cheered and packed my things immediately and moved to Louisiana. I had this weird career of being a journalist and being an outspoken, stubborn person. And also just kind of getting to a point in journalism where I thought journalism was shrinking and I could see people like me who didn't have connections and were difficult, might have trouble surviving it. And so that's when I moved into editing. And so I started editing books, which is how I ended up in England. I did some editing, writing, freelancey stuff for a completely non-journalistic, non-fiction publisher doing basically travel books. And that was completely different, and there was nothing to get angry about. So I never got fired. So I could do that and get paid more and move to England and have a kind of a fresh start. That company just ran out of money and they just went broke. And so I needed a job to sort of fill in for a while I decided what to do next, because everything I get into seems to like run out of money. It's not me, I swear. So I took this job working for the government randomly. It was contract, it was just freelance. And it was good at first and then it wasn't good. It just got boring. It was just fascinating being at the heart of the British government. Like I was right in the middle. I had meetings with the Home Secretary. I got to go to number 10 Downing Street. And even though I didn't love the job or really suit it, I liked that world and I wanted to just absorb it. So I stayed there being a little bored. And that's when I started writing Night School, because that's, I suddenly had the brain space. The job just wasn't challenging, even though the environment was stimulating. And so I had to do something with that sort of mental stimulation. And Night School, I started thinking I'll write about the kids of the people I worked with, like the kids of these government officials and these bigwigs you'd see sort of rolling around in their Bugattis, and I just thought, what would it be like to grow up in this world, so different from my own world? I wrote it without expecting it to be published. So that being published was a surprise. So the move itself was just one of my weird moves, basically. Just like, oh, I'm not very happy about what's happening to newspaper anymore. I guess I'll move to England and become an editor. This is how I roll. I have written counter-perspective chapters, and if you join my book club on my website, you can read chapters of Night School from various characters' perspectives. So the night of the winter ball I've written from Sylvan's perspective and from Carter's perspective. So there's loads of those. I've written a prequel from Isabel's perspective. So I have toyed with it, but to write an entire Night School book from another character's perspective, the closest I'm going to come to that is number 10. Because number 10 is set in the Night School world, but it is a new character. So we will see all of the original characters, or most of them, but from this new character's perspective. And it won't be the same as the Night School story because we've gone forward in time by 6 years. But we will still see Samaria for the first time through someone else's eyes, which I have already written and which is so much fun, I can't even tell you, and which makes me cry when I just read it over. It's so fun to go back there. And it's it hasn't changed. It's still the same, and it's so exciting because Samaria will never change. It is inviolable. We will get a bit of that, just not from one of the original Night School characters. But it's a fresh pair of eyes and a more modern pair of eyes looking at Night School, and time moves fast. So yes and no. Yes and no. But do join my book club so you can read my counter perspectives, my multiple perspectives. There's so many things up there. Is Night School like the fantasy that you had at that age that never came true, but you brought it to life? Yes. Without question, yes. That is my fantasy school. Those are my fantasy friends. You know, those were my, like, if I was 16, those are the guys I would have had, like, crushes on. Like, that is fantasy 16-year-old me's whole life, including my whole hero thing of saving everybody. If you could change one thing in night school, what would it be? I'm answering this question because I actually did change things. In the American version, which is also the version that is in some countries. The British version is in some countries and the American version is in some countries. It just depends on which one my agent sent, and I don't really know because I can't read all the translations. But in the British edition, in Night School 1, both me and my agent let a couple of things pass that I didn't like. And those were, the chapters were too long, so they kind of dragged on. And the other thing was Allie's reaction to what happens with Sylvan after the summer ball. In the British version, her reaction is, like in Sylvan's reaction, they have a conversation that I hate and that I would never write now, in which he says something to her like, you know, you're special, you're different from the other girls I've dated, and she lets him get away with it. In the American version, she calls him on it. And what's fascinating to me is that my editor and my agent and I are all women. And we all let that pass. Like, when I was writing it, we just didn't think about it. We didn't think about it properly, about her reaction to that. The rest of her reaction I stand by. Let's talk about that, shall we? Because I get heat for that. And I'm going to defend Allie's reaction to what happens with Sylvan out at the summer ball. Like, you all know that, like, he aggressively kisses her, he gropes her, and he's just gross. And they have this fight, and Carter has to come save her. Doesn't have to, but he does. The implication is that he would have gone further. And her reaction to that is anger, really fury, and guilt. And she blames herself a bit because she was warned, and she feels like she should have done something differently. Now, that is not the right reaction we would like young women to have. What we'd like young women to do is immediately go to an adult authority figure and to immediately blame the guy. But what I was trying to write was the reaction that I think is common, is normal, that I have had in this situation, that women I know have had in this situation, which is, how did I put myself in that position? Like, that self-doubt is so normal. I could not leave it out. I could not describe it. And it takes her a while to come around to real anger. She goes through all these different stages of hurt and anger and self, like, loathing and self-blaming. And I wrote that not because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the thing that so many of us do. So that's my defense of writing it that way. I still think if I wrote that today, that I would still write her not telling anybody except her friends, because she doesn't trust authority figures. And even though Isabel is still trying to carve her way into her heart and to be trusted, she just, like, on a subconscious level, she doesn't trust adults, so she's not going to go to one. Thank you for hanging out for my second Q&A. I loved all your questions. I really want more questions. Write them in the comments, and when we do this again in a couple of months or a few weeks, it might be your question that I ask. To everybody who asked, you're brilliant. I'm going to do a giveaway very soon, by the way. Coming up, major giveaway. Follow me on all social media so you can be part of it. Subscribe so that you don't miss all the fun stuff and my endless talking. See you soon. Bye.